Taking a stand against the Chinese Communist Party may not be as easy as it sounds inside of China. Nevertheless, thousands have done so. And today these voices are being reinforced outside of China at the United States Capitol. NTD's Melina Wisecup joins us from Congress, where that event just took place moments ago. So Melina, what did folks have to say about this freedom movement, and remind us how it all got started?
Well, what we just saw from that event that took place right outside of the Capitol just moments ago was that, there's a group of Chinese human rights activists and Chinese dissidents who are trying to remind the world that the Chinese Communist Party's stronghold on its people may not be as strong as it seems. And we see that not only with the fact that they're still continuing to commemorate this white paper movement, but also with the white paper movement itself. Now, going back to where this started, this white paper movement started around this time last year when there was tens of thousands of Chinese people, mainly young Chinese people, who stood outside in the streets holding up pieces of white paper in protest of not only the zero COVID lockdowns that they experienced, but also just calling for an end to the dictatorship itself. Now, we heard from some people at the event, and they were just expressing how it's important to stand in solidarity with all of those people who were actually in that white paper movement, considering they have faced backlash by the Chinese Communist Party, but they also expressed the importance of standing with those bold people and encourage them to keep this freedom movement going. Take a look.
What that would take to risk your life in a regime like that, to speak on behalf of truth and protest tyranny, I think that should give us all who are lucky enough to live in the free world some courage to do whatever we can to protect the freedoms we have.
Year after year, more and more Chinese people are standing up to demand their basic human rights. Year after year, the change is happening.
And Chairman Mike Gallagher, he's the chairman of the Select China Committee here in Congress. Of course, he's very vocal on all things China. He actually took it upon himself to, in his speech at this event, list all of the names of the people who were actually still currently detained in China for simply taking to the streets and holding up a blank piece of paper. I also got a chance to catch up with some lawmakers about this white paper movement and the significance of it. Here's what they had to say.
So it's actually a little glimmer of hope that still that China's stronghold on its people is not as strong as they think it is.
And encourage them to continue with that for the cause of freedom around the world, is to acknowledge their sacrifice and applaud their sacrifice. And I think it's important to continue to do that, and this has to happen organically within the country.
So there you have it, Steve. Lawmakers really trying to keep this movement alive even after the zero COVID policy is now behind us. However, there are still the billions of people in China who are facing this repression every day under the Chinese Communist Party.
So Melina, on that note, there now appears to be this new or undiagnosed respiratory illness spreading across China. What are you hearing from lawmakers about their concerns over this, considering that the CCP's cover-up of COVID-19 initially led to millions of deaths and lockdowns worldwide?
Yeah, Steve. So we did speak with some lawmakers who are sitting on the subcommittee on health on the Energy and Commerce Committee today about this. And they said that their big issue here is, of course, transparency. Like you just mentioned, the fact that the Chinese Communist Party covered up the CCP virus, that's what caused millions of deaths around the world. So this is really their number one concern. Many of the lawmakers said they can't trust anything coming out of China. Now, the CDC, for their part, says that they are in contact with the health officials in China about this. And from the lawmakers we heard from, they're also trying to talk with the CDC. Not sure exactly what concerns they're raising. I would assume that they're talking with them more about transparency and just the urgency of it, of making that conversation at the forefront before things get worse, before it spreads around the world and it impacts people here in the United States. One of the lawmakers also told me that there's actually a letter in the works to the CDC right now. He wouldn't go into detail exactly about what this is, but I would assume it revolves around transparency and the need for the CDC and the Biden administration to stand up and require transparency from the Chinese Communist Party about this new unknown diagnosed pneumonia. Steve.
NTD's Melina Wisecup reporting for us live from the Capitol. Melina, thank you. So what does the white paper movement tell us about the CCP's grip on power? How vulnerable is the world's largest communist regime? Joining us now to discuss the silent protest heard around the world, We have Bradley Thayer, Director of China Policy at the Center for Security Policy. Bradley Thayer, thank you so much for joining.
It's my pleasure to join you today.
Bradley, we're 1 year out from the white paper protests which swept across China. Some sort of describe this as a brief moment of defiance, but revolution has to start somewhere. So how significant was this moment actually?
I think it was significant for two major reasons. First, it was significant because, indeed, as you said, it's a protest movement that was widespread and seemed to be, in essence, spontaneous, without leadership of a movement. It was very significant because of that. Its breadth and its depth really showed the disgust that the Chinese people have with the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. And the fact that that has moved into the diaspora to a degree, I think, is a very welcome sign. Secondly, it is sadly equally significant because of the effectiveness of the Chinese Communist Party surveillance state. They are indeed a surveillance superpower, and their ability to identify individuals involved and move against them to suppress the protest, of course, is lamentable and tragic, of course. But even knowing that even knowing the long arm of the Chinese surveillance state, individuals still protested. So that's a cause of great hope.
Bradley, you highlight a very interesting point, which is the fact that there was no leader for them to target. So how scared do you think this type of movement and the prospect of this type of mass gathering makes the Chinese Communist Party?
It makes the Chinese Communist Party very nervous to see a movement, a spontaneous movement arising from civil society, if you will. They fear Chinese civil society greatly, and so they recognize that that serves as an alternative to the party, to the Chinese Communist Party. It allows people to express themselves independently of avenues permitted by the Chinese Communist Party. So they see it as a great danger, of course, to their rule. But it also allows us to recognize, too, that these movements can occur again in the future, right? One could occur tomorrow. For example, and the West and other groups, people of goodwill, of course, in international politics, are not yet well posed to help these movements and to work to sustain them when they do occur, as inevitably we will have other protests like the blank page protest of last year.
Speaking of things that could happen tomorrow, we're actually tracking, Bradley, right now, I'm sure you've seen it, this kind of new novel, potentially novel pneumonia that's spreading across China. I want to get your thoughts. You know, the United States and the West took one approach, the CCP took another. Both countries locked down at different times. China implementing COVID-0. None of the lockdowns, either approach, really helped the situation. Why do you think lockdowns have proven futile, and what is the answer if and when we encounter such an outbreak?
Well, lockdowns have proven futile because because of the deleterious effect, of course, on them, on an individual's psyche, on the well-being, and the fact that people need to be able to be social, interact with other folks. It also failed because it was an overreaction. We know that COVID spread and certain individuals were vulnerable, but the vast majority of the population was not. So the lockdowns became tyranny, in essence. They became a tyrannical tool to control individuals. So they didn't make sense from an epidemiological point of view, and they didn't make sense in terms of a social point of view. For the CCP, of course, it was natural behavior, control the population, lock them down, and show who's in charge. Sadly, in the United States, we now recognize, I think, increasingly, hopefully increasingly, that it was the wrong path to essentially pursue. If it happens again, of course, I think it will be the American people will show greater reluctance to go along, resistance to going along with any effort by the Biden administration to attempt to lock down the population in the face of whatever the series of viruses and bacterial infections seem to be, particularly targeting pediatrics, right? It's essentially infants and young people that seem to be a particular danger. At least that's what it seems so far.
Bradley Thayer, as always, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.